After going through the national income accounting in a domestic sense, now we are in the open economy accounting. We are not really interested in the depth of it in the sense that we are not really interested in how exchange rate is determined and all that, but we are interested in the balance of payments. Anyway, so it starts with actually BOP accounts, right? Balance of payments accounts. Payments basically stands for the payments that we record in credit and also in debit. And from the principle of accounting, actually, if all transactions are recorded properly, then this credit debit must balance each other out. So that is the idea of balance of payments, the term. On the credit side, what we have is all earnings from the foreign activities, all earnings from the foreign activities of Indian residents and Indian government. And on the debit side, essentially any expenditures on abroad or on expenditures abroad. Okay. So that's the simple sense. So now if we go to the details of it, then we'll realize what components are in credit side and in debit side. Okay. And obviously, here is also there is an idea of deficit and surplus, right? And since we are dealing with transactions abroad, the deficit generated can become a cause of concern, and actually it becomes a cause of concern. In many countries, it is not allowed to increase current account deficit beyond a certain point. That's because if it keep on increasing, then it questions the credibility of that nation in the international market. And essentially, nobody will really be ready to give that country any kind of aid or loan, so to say. That's not a very good situation. Okay. Inside the country, the things are a lot different. Although when we are talking about international scenario, we are talking about sovereign governments. But since two different sovereign governments, or more than two sovereign governments, are dealing with each other, the question of credibility as a government, as a nation, is something very, very different from the credibility of an individual person who is taking a loan in the name of him or herself or in the name of company. That situation is actually quite simple than possibly Indian government taking a loan from IMF or Asian Development Bank. The calculations and the Rest of the things are quite different. Okay. So anyways, so we start with measures of balance of credit. Measures of balance of payments. In short, we write it as BOP. And actually, it is BOP that we'll keep on writing frequently, not really the full thing. Now, in the international market, there are two kinds of payments essentially. One is something which is paid hands-on a daily basis or on a monthly basis. And one kind of payment is so huge that it is paid in installments. So we keep those two different. In other sense, if some exchange is occurring in terms of consumption, then the nature of returning that money or nature of payments is something very different. For example, if India is importing onions or India is importing some clothes, the nature of paying for those items is quite different if India is taking a loan, say for the development of roads or bridges. Okay, so we keep them separate essentially because of the nature of consumption and investment. So first comes is the current account. Within that we have three things: merchandise, merchandise exports, the class that is added, and imports, sensible, which is minus, that is subtracted. In the same sense, net service transactions. Here, net basically means that when I'm writing something like service transactions, it basically takes into account the service that India is offering to several countries and also the service that some other countries offer to India. The international picture is quite complex in the sense that as it is true when we talk about giving services, providing services to us, we think of developed countries. Although that is not quite true always, but we can think in terms of this that the relation goes like this. Probably US or Germany, they are giving some expert services to India, and India is again giving service to Bhutan, or Nepal, or some African countries. Right. So net means the net of these two service transactions. Then net transfers. Here also net means the same thing. In the domestic accounting, whenever we wrote net, there net means gross minus depreciation, essentially. So for example, if I go from GDP to NDP, then that basically means GDP minus depreciation. But here net means transactions, money coming from the other countries to us, and the money coming from our country to them. And obviously, given this nature of plus and minus, you can understand that if we are, if people are paying us some service transaction, then that will be added. And if we are giving service payments to somebody else, then that will be subtracted. This net symbolizes that value after that plus and minus. And net income from abroad. Okay. If we add them all up, then what we get is current account balance. Okay. So now we move on to the other thing, which is the capital account. So in the capital account, we have obviously private capital inflows, and outflows, naturally with a minus. Within this, we have something called financial account sub-balance. Financial account sub-balance. So we'll come to that. And apart from that, obviously there is something called a statistical discrepancy. Statistical discrepancy. Now we write statistical discrepancy in the section of capital account. But statistical discrepancy actually has a role to play in general. So we'll come to that. So much like after writing the capital account components, if I give a line here below statistical discrepancy, then that will give us capital account balance. Now, international relationship is not about only private activities. There are government level activities. There are also activities by Reserve Bank or other central banks related to the controlling of exchange rate. All those things they cannot appear either in current account or in capital account. They have a purpose. They are not simply coming out of market exchange kind of a thing. They have a larger picture in mind. So for that, we have another section which is called official reserve transaction. Official reserve transactions. So that two simple components are there. So first is increase in Indian official reserve assets. So it is increase in Indian, so obviously Indian official reserve assets. Okay. So in terms of international economy, we must understand this. That increase in Indian official reserve asset means the asset is becoming India's, but the money is going to somebody else. Okay. So this comes with a minus. And then increase in foreign official assets in India. So they are buying. They are the people who are buying. So basically, money is coming to us. So this is us. Okay. And then if we add them up, then we have total. So I'm simply writing the abbreviation total ORT, official reserve transaction. Okay. All right. Now we'll look at some examples regarding these categories. Okay. Here's this. Okay, so if we talk about current account, the first thing we wrote is merchandise export and import. So we typically kind of understand that merchandise means basically goods and things like that. So for the first component, if I'm looking for examples, that will be, as I said, spices, onions, etc. When it comes to financial transactions, net service transactions. So the second category, net service transactions. There we have to go to the details of it. So what falls here are financial insurances, financial insurance, most importantly shipping services. So private or government ships, which helps in trade. Okay. And then dividends, and interest earned, dividends and interest earned by Indians from their asset abroad, Okay, so obviously that will be a plus. And similar earnings of foreigners from Indian assets. Indian assets, assets in India. Assets in India. So obviously that will be a minus. Now, trying to understand this, we are not talking about the assets themselves. We are talking about interest earned from those assets. So that interest goes obviously into service transactions. Okay. And the last one, which is net transfer and net income, that we understand. Just have to needed to elaborate this one a little bit. Okay. So if we take a loan, to be very if you think about that, the main idea behind writing this is that if you take a loan from a foreign government, then the loan amount will appear in the capital account, which we will see. But if we talk about the interest payment based on that loan, then that interest payment will appear here in the current account. Okay. Because obviously interest is a regular form of payment. And generally what we understand by export import, these two terms, those calculations appear in the merchandise exports and imports. But one thing, as we are going through this open economy, we must try to understand is that if we talk about the current situations, we have nearly 200 countries in this world. And if we talk about India, India trades with many of them. Right? It's not that what is seen on papers as the only countries that India deal with, something like Japan or UAE or UK or US. Those are not the only countries that India deals with. India also deals with Uganda. India also deals with Zambia. Right? So it's a huge connection that we are talking about. It's an entirely different span when compared to the national income accounting in the domestic setup. Okay, so this is something that we must consider. The second thing that we must also think about is that it is true that obviously trade has been an engine of growth for the world itself, but that involves some form of disparity, obviously. So in that scenario, that it involves some disparity, there are political salient political interests or hidden political interests also in the activities that are carried out by home countries in foreign countries. So that is also there. Then there is the question of exchange rate. And if exchange rate situation becomes bad, which is sort of now with India, then it becomes real tough to pay those interest payments, which is paid on a regular basis. Okay, so that those things are some points which were not present in case of a domestic accounting. Alright, so in capital account, or sometimes as we call it, the financial account, to more properly explicitly talk about what we are saying, financial account. So first of all, what is the term capital flows meant? Because we are talking about capital inflow and capital outflow. So what are capital flows? Is the exchange of financial assets, involving individuals in different countries. As well as direct investment, such as the purchase of a plant, in another country. Okay, so exchange. One of the fascinating exchanges that probably will interest us is the exchange of financial assets that occurred during the period of East Pakistan, or nearing the time of 1971. All right. So during that period, exchange of financial assets, also not only financial assets actually, exchange of land and houses, those also occurred between people residing in this country, mostly in West Bengal, and people residing in a different country, which was the then East Pakistan. So that is some kind of exchange of financial assets that will interest us. But other than that, there are obviously many examples. And this is very easy, direct purchase of a plant, which happens all the time. Whenever, for example, when Tata bought the Jaguar Land Rover, JLR made the JLR deal in the UK with UK, so then this sort of thing occurred. Okay, so those are the things that we are mentioning or categorizing as capital flows. Okay. So then obviously capital inflow is basically Indians. Capital inflow is basically when foreigners are buying Indian assets. So because when we are talking about capital inflows, in terms of assets, we are looking at money essentially. So the point is that inflow. Let's talk about this inflow, which is added. Inflow is purchase of Indian assets by foreign individuals. Okay. that includes a lot of things. When we're talking about assets, we're not talking about only houses and things like that. We are talking about financial assets also. So, for example, Indian private or government bonds. So let me just again just mention what we are saying. When we are talking about a bond, the bond has a face value. So the face value that a bond has, that is something that is included here. But obviously, a bond also comes with interest return. That interest return goes to capital account. Okay. Then stocks, that is shares, and bank deposits. All of things, all types of things are exchanged essentially. And not only that, when it comes to foreign investors, we know about FII. FII is financial institutional investors. They invest in such a huge amount and in such short times that we actually call them, they are institutional investors. It's not like an individual is doing this, although we are talking about foreign individuals, but just to mention, foreign institutes also do this and quite regularly. And they also have a quite a huge role to play in the way our share market behaves. Okay. So just to give an example, if a recession suddenly hits India, then one of the biggest movement of assets that we'll see in terms of share market, at least, or bonds or deposits, is that the FIIs, that is financial institutional investors, FIIs will take their money out of this country and will take it to their own country. Okay, so that will be a capital outflow because the money is going to their country. Otherwise, they are buying stocks here, but the money is coming to us, so we take that as an inflow. And obviously, the slightly debatable and famous thing is FDI, which is foreign direct investment. So that also is capital inflow, and obviously, given this Make in India initiative, we have a huge amount of capital inflow, essentially. Okay. All right. So now the interesting term, which is the statistical discrepancy. What is it doing there? So, statistical discrepancy. All right, so this is interesting. It is the amount, right? What is the exact line? It is the amount that is to be added, to make BOP indeed balance. Now this is really interesting. It is interesting because we said that if we record all the transactions, then by the principal accounting, obviously the BOP must balance. But then we are saying that we need to have a statistical discrepancy component, which basically involves errors and omitted terms. We add it to make the BOP balance, which is obviously in reality just the opposite. You look at the capital account balance, you look at the current account balance, and then you understand what is the gap, and that becomes your statistical distribution. So how will you know before that? Now, why this is needed? This is needed because there are some hidden transactions in international. There is a hidden component in international transactions, and this is something that is not very easy to understand. Hidden component in international transactions. So we can keep it like this, that there is indeed this component, which there is. But if you're interested more, you can look into Freud, Open Economy. But one of the better references will be any book on international economics. Any book on international economics. Much like we have a chapter on accounting in Mankiw's macro or Freud's macro. Much the same, we have an accounting chapter, one or two sometimes, in a book of international economics also. And there you will find what we're talking about in greater detail. Okay, and there you will find discussion which will help you understand better. So obviously it is suggested that you look up to a book of international economics. Okay, so now we come to the most that component which is actually hard to understand directly, and something which was not there in domestic accounting, which is the official reserve transactions. Official reserve transactions. So first of all transactions recorded earlier, that is in the other two accounts, are made of autonomous motives. That is the actual term, autonomous motives. That is, there is no better purpose than buying things when you are buying them, or there is no better purpose than selling things when you are actually selling them. So when you are buying an asset, you are buying an asset because you want to buy that asset, and there is no hidden economic agenda of the nation behind that. Whenever that comes into play, it becomes a part of official reserve transactions. Okay, so it is not only us even Indian government. We are talking here about RBI when they are probably buying out dollar or yen probably from the Indian markets, and when they are selling Indian rupees. Right? So those kind of things. Transactions which come as a part of monetary policy. That's the kind of transaction that we are talking about. Okay. So obviously, ORT is not really a standard abbreviation, but just to save space. So ORTs are carried out by either, so talking from the Indian perspective, either RBI or central banks of other countries. So Federal Reserve and some European Central Bank, those kind of things. So Central Bank central banks of other countries. The first thing that you must understand. And why? This why changes everything. In pursuit of international policy objectives. International policy objectives. Okay, so this is this is the thing that we are talking about. And again, it is true that if you go and look into an international economics book, specifically where they talk about institutions, and institutions, by institutions I typically mean IMF, or you can look up to the website of IMF also, or probably and World Bank. Okay. Then obviously you will better understand some of the terms that now we are going to write, because those terms, they individually deserves a sort of treatment which we cannot really give now. Okay, so it is better that you go to International Monetary Fund's website. It's a great website in the sense that it kind of explains a lot of things for keeping in mind sort of someone who knows a little bit of economics. Okay, and also both of these sites, they have a great data set. So in future, if you want to work with some kind of model, simple model or complex, you can look up to their sites also. Okay, so they are not only there giving money to people or taking money back or something like that, they're also serving a lot of different purposes. And learning directly from them is better, because then you will know about the real-time activities of the countries. Because one of the simple things that I must say at this point, which will make you understand that it is quite difficult in international scenario, is that the first point that we must ask is, say India is taking a loan from, or India is giving a loan probably to some North African country. Now that North African country has their currency, we have our currency, and and through trade, through the long period of returning that loan via interest payments, many things can happen, right? So now, who will guarantee that nothing will happen? Right? Many things will happen, which may change the price of the status of rupee, the status of the currency of that African country. So in that scenario, the central question is, in which currency must all these transactions occur? And if that occurs, then how to guarantee that, due to some international events or third-party reasons, the creditor or the debtor is not enjoying some extra benefits? So those are quite complex questions. Or take, for example, all these 200 countries, most of them are capable of asking for loan from IMF. And that's good. But the point is, IMF is not IMF is not some national bank. So IMF doesn't have a currency of its own. For example, if we talk about State Bank of India in our country, then the central currency that they have is rupees, because it's an Indian bank. But IMF is an international bank. Now, we do not have a single currency for the entire world. So what must be the currency of IMF? That is a very difficult question to answer. All right, because it is not the fact that dollar is the only popular currency. Obviously, dollar is the most popular currency, but not the only popular currency. The second difficult thing is, whenever you are selecting a currency to deal with at international level, you must also think about the economic stability of that country, because with the economic instability, the currency value changes. So all these complex questions are there. All right. So because of that, in some sense, countries who funds IMF are those countries who fund IMF. They also belong to the group of countries, to a larger group of countries who can ask for loans. All right. So that may at first may look may look a little circular, but it is definitely not. So because of that, we have several different kind of terms when it comes to IMF and World Bank or international transactions. We'll start with some of them. So what is our holdings of gold? So this is, we all understand. Then SDRs. So what is SDR? Its full form is special drawing rights. Special drawing. As I said, if you want to know in detail what these are, then go and check the IMF website. Okay. And foreign currency holding. Foreign currency holding. Or sometimes, as we call it, forex. Okay. Now, we'll look at some of the important points related to all these discussions. So we'll call it and write it as notes. So number one is we will look at this term which is called trade balance. Is very famous, which is essentially our net export, actually X minus M. But in terms of accounting, if we say X minus M in goods and services. So this is, we must understand. Okay, goods and services. Okay, then comes number two. So, in each period, we as we said that they must balance out. So, in each period, CA plus KFA is equal to 0. That is balance. CA is basically current account, and KFA is capital or financial account. We use K from the German spelling of capital. And lastly, to describe what we are actually talking about, let us just write this. So, these describes the same, or probably we will deal with that as a problem later. That will be far more beneficial. For the time being, let us look at another equation. So P minus G, that is budget surplus if positive, plus S minus T is equal to X minus M. So what is that? This is, let me write like this. This is public saving or government saving, and this is private saving. Oh, this is not, sorry, this is not T, sorry, I. Yeah, is equal to, as we noted, trade balance. Okay. Now this is in short, this is interesting in the sense that What it says is this, that is savings investment. If we look at this equation like this, savings investment imbalance can be offset by trade balance or trade imbalance. Not imbalance, actually trade balance. So saving investment imbalance can be offset by trade balances. That means with an open economy, now we have a greater window of opportunity, because if we talk about the domestic setup, this was not there. So the public saving and private saving, they need to kind of, in savings investment scenario, they have to balance. So there is on one side we had investment, and one side we had this public saving, this domestic saving. But here we have an opening due to the open economy itself, that now we have trade balance, and it can deal with imbalances occurring here or the other way around, whichever is needed given the situation.